Hey guys, this is Nick. Just wanted to give a quick heads up. We are going to be spoiling Rebels. This episode, we're specifically going to be talking about Kanan, one of the main characters. This is going to be kind of a character study slash analysis that me and Carmelo are doing. So if you haven't seen Rebels, please watch it first and then come back and watch this video. I think you'll be much more informed and ready to see what we have to say. So thank you guys.
You are now entering Nick and Mello's hyperspace.
I'm Nick, and I think my favorite moment with Kanan Jarrus is the him training Sabine how to use the dark saber. I think that is a beautiful and powerful moment for both characters.
And I'm Carmelo, and I love all of the scenes with Bendu, with Kanan and Bendu in season 3. It's just a wonderful way of fleshing out the complexity of Kanan by having Bendu there as almost like a mirror. Of who he is.
In our journeys through hyperspace, we examine everything and anything Star Wars from the point of view of two lifelong fans, one young, one old, who came together through the will of the Force.
And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Kanan Jarrus, or Caleb Doom, not only because it's one of our favorite characters, but because he's pretty unique in many ways. And one of the things that I always find really interesting about some characters in Star Wars is that this is not a live action character. This is a character that we have seen in Rebels, in Star Wars Rebels, the animated show, and he has the comic series that are how many issues do you know?
Yeah, so
like 12?
12 issues. They ran through 2 volumes.
And there they are.
Yeah, volume 1 and volume 2 kind of explains how he survives Order 66 and that whole fiasco, and it's really good. It's I think it came out around the time the show was airing, so it's very good.
Right.
I recommend. You don't have to read this to understand his character, but I think it's fun to.
It's really wonderful.
Get a little context
material to him, and there's of course the A New Dawn novel.
Yes.
About Hera and Kanan.
Is it John Jackson Miller who wrote that?
That's correct, and it's one of the early canon novels.
That's actually the
first ones.
That's actually the very first.
Is novel. It very? Okay.
The very first one that was considered in the new canon. So
this is the nice things about the young people. They remember this stuff. I just read the novels.
I was there.
You were there.
I was there.
I was there, but I was not reading fiction in 2015. So
I was there. I was there. I don't know.
2017, I think, is when I started reading fiction. So it was not in my world. It was not in my world. I think we really should start talking about Kanan himself and his narrative arc and all of the wonderful things that we are intrigued by with Kanan. If you want to start, that would be great, and then I can just react to your ideas.
Yeah, so I know if you guys listen to season 1, we did a whole episode on Rebels and why we love it so much. And one of my favorite episodes we did, because as I've mentioned, I think a couple times now, that is my favorite story outside of the original trilogy. I love all the characters in Rebels. I think they're all incredible. But Kanan, to me, is my favorite of the Rebel crew, of the Ghost crew, I'm sorry. And I think his arc is one of the best in all of Star Wars for a Jedi and for a male character in Star Wars. I think he's very open. He's very vulnerable. And we get to see him grow in a relationship with all the other main characters. And a lot of people, I think you mentioned this in that episode of Rebels, that it's kind of represents like a queer family and a found family. And a lot of people always kind of deem him as the father since he's the oldest and the mentor to Ezra and then Sabine when she's training with the darksaber. But I kind of view him as more of a big brother personally.
I think it's one of the interesting things about Kanan, because his character moves from master to Ezra in the Force to father of the Ghost family to older brother. And so it's really interesting how I don't think of him as a stereotypical father figure. He is someone who is sort of, his social role keeps shifting depending on who we're talking about. The way he relates to Hera, the way he relates to Ezra, and the way he relates to Sabine. Later, the way he relates to Bendu. It's really interesting how Kanan is many Kanans
Mhm.
and he's still one person, but there's a constant shift in how he relates to the other characters, and I like that very, very much. The other thing that I wanted to say is seeing that connection with Rex,
Yeah.
and the aftermath of Order 66, and sort of him as a Padawan, processing the trauma of Order 66, of the Jedi genocide,
Mhm.
and then how that sort of affects and molds the way that he thinks of Rex at the beginning of season 2, and then how, as he knows Rex more and more and more, he has to sort of rethink or tweak that relationship with the clones. I found that really, really interesting.
I know I did too. I'm glad you mentioned that about the trauma, because I think we've mentioned that all the characters in Rebels, they all kind of have a very traumatic past, and they all kind of
Mhm.
come together through their shared trauma and experiences, and they find love and connection with each other. And I think Rex kind of does the same thing. They become, they're not like best of friends, but they do become very close, and they respect each other very well, I think, as the
Right.
series goes on. And I remember watching Rebels when it first came out, and that when we reunite with Rex and Wolf and Gregor, and he is very hesitant to trust them or do any kind of have any kind of relationship with them because of his trauma. And I think that's one of the reasons we love his character arc so much, is his traumatic past. He's able to grow from that and learn, one, how to be trusting of faces that have tried to kill him, and two, how to be a leader and how to grow up
Yes.
when
Yes.
he didn't get the opportunity to grow up, because I guess a little context, if you're this far into the video, he was very young. He was a Padawan, teenager, about Ezra's age, and then kind of quit being a Jedi
Oh
for a
yeah,
while.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
quit being a Jedi, and Ezra's really the one that kind of helped him reconnect with the Force, or thrusted him into reconnecting with the Force. He saw a kid like him and Ezra go through similar experiences, losing family, being alone, and he stepped in and did his best to be a mentor to him, even though he didn't really have that. He was kind of on
Right.
his own. So
Right.
they're learning together, and I think that's
Right.
really beautiful, their relationship.
It's really interesting to see. This morning I watched the beginning of Bad Batch, where we have a version of the story, and there's also the Kanan version of the story in the comics. They happen in the same planet. It is during a battle. His master is there.
A few details are different.
The details are slightly different. Whatever, it's Star Wars.
Same story.
But it's the same story. And it was really interesting for me reading the comics and watching that episode sort of back to back this morning, and sort of knowing who Kanan becomes, and sort of seeing the moment of trauma,
Yeah.
and sort of the repercussions of that with Rex, with Hera in the novel, about telling her, I am a force sensitive person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those kinds of things. It's really fun. We don't always get a more or less complete arc of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't know what Luke Skywalker was doing at age 13 or 14. We don't know much about when he was a baby.
Right.
But with Kanan, we get a really nice long arc,
Mm-hmm.
of all of the things that he's doing. So that's really quite fun.
I think one thing I appreciate about his story, and what really sold me on Rebels and him as a character was, when you first introduced to him, he is very, I don't know how I would describe him, maybe a scoundrel type, Han Solo, Lando Calrissian type character. He comes across that way, of course.
In the show or in the
Rebels, when we
Okay.
first see him, he comes across that way. We don't know much about him, obviously, at that point but you kind of, as the show goes on, you kind of learn that's kind of a facade, a face he's putting up to hide this pain and trauma that he's dealt with. And once he reconnects with Ezra, or connects with Ezra and reconnects with the Force, he has to thrust into that role again, and is called to a higher power. And I think it's really cool to see the shift, the recognition that he has to go through. And there's a line that really was like, it's really when I started taking Rebels very seriously. I think it was in season 2, when the rebellion's growing larger, and I don't remember the context exactly what happened, but Kanan and Hera have a little sidebar conversation away from the briefing room and he broke protocol or something like that. And he goes to explain to Hera, I didn't want to be a part of this large rebellion.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to
yeah,
be, I just
yeah.
wanted to do simple, good
I
things.
just want to help people,
Just
right?
want to help people, don't want to be in
Right.
the military. And then
Yeah, that's at the very beginning of season
I
2.
think, and he says the line that really was like, oh, it get deep. He said that I've survived one war. I don't know if I'm ready for another. And it
Mhm.
really struck like, oh, this show is going to be very serious. That to me
No,
was like
yeah,
the moment where I was like, wow, I'm actually
that
liking this guy.
that's a really beautiful moment. It's a moment I'm gonna talk about my product placement back here. It's a moment that I mentioned in my book, because it is a really important shift in Kanan, where the Ghost Crew has basically been sort of a Robin Hood gang, and now at the beginning of season 2, they are part of a larger purpose. Kanan went through what it meant for the Jedi to be part of a larger purpose and see the disaster of that.
Yeah.
And so there's fear, there's anxiety, there's tension, because Hera did not go through that as a child, even though she suffered through the Clone Wars. She was not a soldier like Kanan was, and so it's really interesting to see the conflict, the internal conflict, not only about the clones when he meets Rex, but the whole thing about now we are part of an alliance, and that's Kanan is saying that's not what I signed up for,
right?
And so that's really interesting. And you're right. I think that's one of the moments where the show starts showing the layers of the story,
starts maturing.
Yeah.
It really does.
Absolutely. God, you said something that triggered something in my mind, but because I'm 57 years old, it just went.
Don't tell the audience how old you are.
Out. I'm sorry?
I said, don't tell the audience how old you are.
Oh, whatever. I don't care. I don't care about age. I'm not going to remember it.
You'll remember when we're not recording, I'm sure.
I'm really annoyed because I thought it was really interesting. You something that you said triggered something, and now it's gone. It's gone. I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned this to you, Nick, before the show. I've always been, Kanan is one of those really important characters in Star Wars who has never been in live action, who has been an animated character, who has been. I remember.
We're leaving
you were talking about that sort of that facade that Kanan has.
Yes.
It's really interesting to see that in the novel.
Yes.
Where he's drinking alcohol and he's sort of like a rebellious teenager.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see. I read the novel after I saw the whole show.
Same here.
And so it was interesting sort of going back in time, because the novel sort of was a little prequel for me, of sort of knowing how he meets Hera and sort of what kind of young man Kanan was. And so it's interesting to see the Padawan in Bad Batch, which is the last thing we see. It's interesting to see the sort of troubled young adult in New Hope, in New Dawn. He is not in New Hope. And then seeing this amazing development of this Jedi.
I was gonna. Funny you say that about the rebellious teenager. If you think about it, he was a teenager when the Jedi kind of ended, and I'm sure it's been explained ad nauseum that the Jedi are very strict and very by the book, and so he doesn't have that structure around him anymore.
Yeah.
What does he do? And he feels he has no purpose. I'm sure he's depressed, and so that's a great way for John Jackson Miller to kind of
it's
show
really
that shift, that change.
It's really interesting.
It's really good.
I find really interesting to understand Kanan both as a Padawan and then as a Jedi, even though the Jedi Order doesn't exist anymore. When we sort of put him in context with Ahsoka, because Ahsoka and Kanan sort of have a parallel story They're both Padawans during the Clone Wars. They have to fight as soldiers, as Padawans. They're not even Jedi Knights yet. They actually never become Jedi Knights. And they have this sort of like back and forth about how they feel about the Force and how they feel about the Order and how they feel about the Order being a military institution during the Clone Wars. And so it's really interesting to think about Kanan while thinking of Ahsoka. They don't have the same story. They are very different characters, but they have lots of there are a series of points where they sort of connect. Not only because of when they are, but because we get to see their development as Padawans during the Clone War, and we get to see their reaction to Order 66 and the decisions that they make through Order 66. We mentioned earlier the whole idea that Kanan is not ready to be part of an alliance, while also in season 1, Ahsoka has been part of the alliance and helping the alliance and making connections with it. And so we have this really interesting contrast between Ahsoka, who has decided to join the alliance, while Kanan is being very reluctant to join the alliance. I just found it really, really interesting. I don't think I have anything super intelligent to say, but I really think it would be a fun exercise to think of Ahsoka and to think of Kanan and to think of their different arcs and to think of the meeting points that they keep having in the history of the galaxy.
We talked about it before we started recording, but the thing that I really like about both of them is they are very non-traditional Jedi. They don't go through the same trials. They don't go through the same structure that everyone else, because of the Clone Wars and then because of Order 66. And they're two of the, they're not considered full Jedi or even Jedi Knights or Masters, but we get to follow them as young Padawans into adulthood. And a lot of times we just get introduced to Jedi that are already full grown adults or Masters, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Yoda and Mace Windu. We don't really get to see a lot of their younger years. And these two are essentially like young adult characters that get to be grow up before our eyes in ways that we don't get to see other Jedi. Even Luke, I would say, we get to see a little bit of that, but there's a long period of time right now that we don't really know what happened. So those two, they're very fun. I just really, as a young person watching their stories unfold about the same age as them, it's cool to see that, I really enjoy both of them.
Have you read the young adult Padawan novel of Kenobi yet?
No, I've not read that.
Okay, I haven't either. And I'm curious to read it now that we're having this conversation, to see how Kenobi sort of connects or does not connect with the conversation that we're having about Ahsoka and Kanan, because he's definitely growing as a Padawan in a very different era. And so his decisions and the consequences of those decisions are going to be quite different. You talked about masculinity.
I did.
I love for you to talk a little bit about that and Kanan and the whole Star Wars world.
We talked about it in our pre-game, I guess you could say, before this episode. We talked about what we want to talk about. Sorry.
I shouldn't drink water while you make a joke.
We discussed some ideas we were going to talk about relating to Kanan, and I talked about masculinity with him, and we mentioned earlier he's kind of thrusted into a position where he's unfamiliar. He's as a mentor, as a kind of a father / big brother figure to a lot of the characters on Rebels, and I just think his story, we've been talking about it this whole episode, was just so beautiful, and how he is able to learn from his mistakes and learn from the trauma that he's dealt with and become a positive, compassionate, vulnerable leader and figure to this family that he's found out of his trauma. He never would have, if things had played out ideally, the Jedi win, and he never would have found these people. So even through this tragedy, he's able to learn from it, and really become a true Jedi in my eyes. One of the best characters in all of Star Wars. And as a big brother myself, I'm the oldest of six. So like,
Oh wow.
it's very, I relate to his story very much of things happening in life that you have no control over, and
Mm.
picking up the pieces of a previous generation, and trying to not only heal yourself, but be there for other people who are going through trauma. So I that's why I think he's one of my favorite characters on a personal level. I think I really enjoyed that.
There's a tendency in the Jedi to sort of avoid sort of gestures of toxic masculinity, like it happens in the Sith, for example.
Mhm.
But there's something really special about Kanan, I think, because he always feels vulnerable. And I love that in him, that this is a man who, as you say, is sort of constantly having to deal with all these different roles that life is sort of throwing at him. But there's a sensitivity to him that sometimes remind me of Kenobi a little bit.
Yeah.
But I really love that in him. Kanan is not Mace Windu.
No, no,
Kanan
very
is not
very different.
Kanan is not Qui-Gon.
No,
There's a stubbornness to Qui-Gon that Kanan doesn't really have, and I think it's partly because of this sort of relationship that he has with the Force, both within the institution and then later outside the institution, and also because he never actually becomes a Jedi Knight. So the Jedi Order is something from the past.
yeah.
It's not something from the present. Other men might just sort of seal up and move on, and Kanan does not do that. Kanan does not do that.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about that. I think, as we mentioned earlier, early on, he does he's a little hesitant or a little guarded, and he puts up that facade. And I think that's a real reason he does that is because he's a Jedi, former Jedi, former Padawan. He has to be in hiding, so he can't really go around telling everybody that. But he does. I think he wants to be a lot of the times. I think part of the reason is because he didn't get a chance to grow up and mature. He doesn't know how to, and I think through his connections with Hera, especially, but with Kanan and Zeb and all the characters of the Ghost Crew, he learns how to be compassionate, learns how to be the person they need, and learns how to have healthy relationships in a time of peril. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, we didn't plan this, but I would love to talk a little bit more about him in season 4.
Oh,
sort of the last days of Kanan, and I think after that we need to say goodbye.
Yeah.
To me, he is such a different character in season 4. There is it's like his soul becomes quiet.
Yeah.
I find that really, really beautiful, in a way that there are very few male characters in Star Wars that have that sort of sense of centering, quietness, wisdom. He becomes a sage in a way in that last season. And I every time he dies, I cry like a baby. I just lose it. I mean, my whole chair shakes.
To me, that is I don't like him dying. I hate it, but I think it's, to me, one of the most impactful deaths to me in all of the series. Like, it's so emotional. It's well earned. It's very well earned compared to some other deaths. And I think it hits home. And I know in another episode we talked about one of your moments that makes you teary eyed or gets you emotional is the one with the aftermath of his death with Chopper and Hera. That's a good one.
Holding the hand.
Yeah, so beautiful. His death in general. I love one thing I'll mention that I remembered. I think right before he goes off to Malachor with Ahsoka and Ezra. This is before he gets blinded, by Maul.
This is end of season 2.
Yes, he tells, and it's funny and it's so poetic, and I'm sure it was planned. It was so beautiful. He says, "I will see you again," and then of course he comes back blind, so he physically can't see her. And then I don't remember exactly. I do remember one of the last encounters he has with Bendu is saying something about when you're one with the, when you're truly one with the Force, you'll be able to see again. Yeah. And then of course when he dies, his eyes heal, and he gets to actually see Hera and Ezra again, and it's so beautiful. Man, it's so impactful. You get goosebumps talking about it. It's cool.
It's beautiful.
I love it.
Me too.
Love him.
Well, thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Thank you, audience. Don't forget to like our videos.
Please.
If you enjoy this, and if you subscribe, then we can let you know when our next episode is going to be released, so you can see them all.
And if you're busy and on the go, Spotify is an option.
That's absolutely right.
It's also, you guys can subscribe to us on Spotify.
Thank you very much.
All right. See you guys.